right, let's talk about where we've been, so we can kind of just trace what we're doing again. All right, so we started out talking about Christ the King. Christ is King both of the temporal and spiritual order, and then we shifted our sights towards the temporal order, and talked about what that means about God using the temporal order in order to save us, not in the sort of messianic Marxist sense, but in the sense of it is a means by which men and women can be saved. And then we took a look at God's plan for America. We looked at Our Lady of Guadalupe, and we looked at Columbus and Cortez. And then we talked about how the numbers of converts from Our Lady of Guadalupe was almost exactly the number of converts lost in Northern Europe during the Reformation. And then last week we talked about all the sort of Catholic elements in the founding, and how there's enough of the natural law there that we could build a Catholic Republic, all right? And so now we'll sort of spend the rest of the semester talking about how that's done, all right? Okay, all right. So because we're Americans, we don't always grasp some of the sort of unique aspects of the United States. And one of those unique aspects is the fact that it's kind of a country without a nationality, the way that other countries are. So Germans are in Germany because they're German. Like, that's how they have a German character, right? There isn't necessarily an American character. And in fact, when Chesterton came to the United States, he noticed that there was just this diversity, right? This melting pot. And so he thought that America was the only nation in the world that was founded on a creed. All right, and so that's what we're going to sort of build on Chesterton's idea of, America can be a melting pot, but there's something that actually makes up the pot, right? And so that's what we're going to focus on this week, is talking about sort of the American creed, which we talked a little bit about last week when we talked about sort of how Jefferson lays out the creed when he says, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness." So we're going to talk about those three. We talked a little bit last week about sort of understanding what it means to be endowed with something versus being given sort of just free reign with something, right? So you get an endowment as a graduate student. It means that all your work is for something, right? You can't just use it however you want to use it. And we talked a lot about rights, and we'll talk more about rights again today. But what I really want to focus on are life and liberty, and then sort of liberty and the pursuit of happiness being sort of one thing. Okay. But before we do that, let's talk a little bit about what John Paul II called the art of the possible, and what he meant by that. Okay, so if we're going to set out to change the culture, right? Like, we can try to do something like overturn Roe versus Wade right away, right? But if that doesn't work, what do you do? All right, and this is what John Paul II said in Evangelium Vitae. He said, "A particular problem of conscience can arise in cases where a legislative vote would be decisive for the passage of a more restrictive law aimed at limiting the number of authorized abortions in place of a more permissive law already passed or ready to be voted on. Such cases are not infrequent. It is a fact that while in some parts of the world there continue to be campaigns to introduce laws favoring abortion, often supported by powerful international organizations, in other nations, particularly those which have already experienced the bitter fruits of such permissive legislation, there are growing signs of a rethinking in this matter. In a case like the one just mentioned, when it is not possible to overturn or completely abrogate a pro-abortion law, an elected official whose absolute personal opposition to procured abortion was well known could illicitly support proposals aimed at limiting the harm done by such a law and at lessening its negative consequences at the level of the general opinion and public morality. This does not, in fact, represent an illicit cooperation with an unjust law, but rather a legitimate and proper attempt to limit its evil." So what he's basically saying here, he's saying a few things. First, he's saying that it's okay to sort of go piecemeal to take away some injustice, right? And in fact, that might be the best you can do initially. But he's also talking about the fact that despite what people say, you can legislate morality. Okay, people say we can't legislate morality. What you can't do is create a utopia where everybody's perfect, but you can, nevertheless, the law is a teacher, right? So think about something like slavery, okay? Would slavery ever go away without the law changing? Maybe not, right? And so the law is actually a moral teacher. People will say things like, okay, abortion is okay because it's legal, all right? And so how we frame laws and what the laws are actually begin to teach people morality. But there's also at a certain point where, which somebody brought this up last week, was asking about when we, should we have laws against everything that's wrong? Why not? Go ahead, Con.
It's too difficult to drive people into greater acts of vice.
Yeah, so if it's beyond the virtue of the common person, right? So remember, what's the role of the government again? Say it louder, Casey.
Common good.
Yeah, to protect and promote and preserve the common good, right? And so everything is always aimed towards the common good, right? So if I were to make a law that, I think one of the classic examples is the 3-strike law, right? Where no matter what you do the third time, if you've been in jail twice, you're going for good, right? And you get this phenomenon of somebody stealing from a convenience store and then running from the cops, creating absolute havoc, right? And that's why a law like that is unjust, right? Because it does more harm to the common good than if you just treated them independently, okay? And so the eye, sort of what you tolerate, always has to be sort of aimed at the common good. And so you can, the sort of thing that John Paul II is talking about too, that's the challenge, is when tolerance becomes a good thing, but when tolerance becomes acceptance, right? So think about, sort of trace the history of abortion, right? So what did Roe versus Wade say, more or less? The state couldn't stop someone from having an abortion. Now, where are we now? Yeah. So that's sort of okay, we're willing to tolerate something that's evil. Where are we now? Yeah, so the state promotes it, right? And so that's why you always have to keep chipping away, right? And you can't ever get to the point of where tolerance is acceptance, okay? All right, can anyone think of a historical example where this has worked? This art of the possible?
Kind of slavery in America? Because they kept making it harder and harder to have slaves, or at least limited.
Okay, so kinda or definitely?
Definitely.
Okay, so think about the founding, okay, the founders. So was it possible for the founders to completely eradicate slavery?
Nope.
Why not?
Because the slave states were not cooperating.
Okay, so if I'm trying to found a country, right, and I kind of need Virginia, if I don't have Virginia, I'm not going to form a country, right? And Virginia says we want slaves, so you say, okay, well, we're not going to have Virginia in there. Okay, does the United States ever become the United States without Virginia? So that's the first question, all right? I don't know the answer to that question. Probably say no, but what were you going to say, Casey?
I get that he's saying it's not, but I'm not understanding how this is not just other means.
Okay, so yeah, when we get to the end, we'll talk about it, right? Okay. All right, so the second thing is, and this is the part people don't normally discuss, what do you do with the slaves once they're free? What happens to them? Do you just say, okay, tomorrow you're gone? Yes?
Well, historically, what ended up happening is they just ended up working on the same farm as before, but for barely any wage, so basically a slave again.
Yeah. So if you don't have a plan in place, then those people can then go free, or you don't have some Lincoln initially sets out to actually send them somewhere, right? And they tossed around the idea of giving them all a stipend, all these little ideas. Well, the United States, when it was founded, didn't have the opportunity to give money to slaves, right? And so there's a danger of making the slaves' lives actually worse, right? Which in some respects happened. So what did they do? Well, they began to chip away at it, right? So one of the things they did was they said, okay, we won't touch the question for 20 years, all right? And then when the 20 years was up, they said, okay, no more importing slaves. All right. They put a foundation in place, right? All men are created equal. All right. And once that idea sort of seeped into the American mind, they were able to. It was much easier to sort of turn it around. Okay. All right. So Casey, go back to your question now about the end justifying the means.
So the last line says, this does not, in fact, represent an illicit cooperation with an unjust law, but rather a legitimate and proper attempt to limit its evil aspects.
Okay, so...
I don't fully understand it, particularly with your slavery.
Okay, so the thing is already there. The evil's already present.
Okay.
All right?
So you're not doing something evil.
Yeah. What you're trying to do is limit the effect of the evil. As it, currently exists.
So an example that comes to mind that I feel like would be wrong would be I don't remember what it's called, but people trying to make Hitler happy.
Appeasement.
Yes, appeasement, that's the word. The evil's already going on, and they're trying to limit it. How is that? Whereas I would say that's something that's worth,
Yeah, so that's the proper definition, proper understanding of tolerance versus acceptance, right? And it's always a fine line, right? So they may have been willing to tolerate certain things, but at a certain point you have to say, okay, we can't, if you don't stop the spread of evil, then what you're doing is, it's not the right way, not wrong morally, but it's not working, right? And so you have to sort of come back around and try it again. But you always have to act to limit the effect of the evil. So, appeasement doesn't work because you're not doing anything actively to stop the spread of evil. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. Connor.
So it talks about one of the things he mentions here is that the opinion, or what am I saying? Who's an elected official whose absolute personal opposition to procured abortion was well known, for this to support proposals aimed at limiting the harm done. I've seen a lot of, kind of pro-life bills where it'd be like the heartbeat bill, the pain sensitive, or something like that, where it seems to kind of, the laws almost, I guess this might be like the law as a teacher, but it seems to teach, okay, if we do the heartbeat bill, yes, that does limit abortion. I mean, it makes it not full term, but it also kind of seems to begin to support the philosophy, okay, well, it's a human once the heart's beating. I guess I'm not sure, is it possible that there's no way you could make your personal opposition to it well known enough that people wouldn't just think, oh, well, okay, well, by passing this law, you think that this is where life begins.
Yeah, so almost like a connecting the dots kind of effect.
They said it's one of the things, in order to not involve, one of the conditions in order to not promote scandal is people have to know that you're doing this because it's the only thing you can get done.
Yeah.
With something like is there a situation in which you almost have to make, you just couldn't communicate that to people in such a way, you have to say, okay, it's either on or it's off. The people won't understand anything in between.
Yeah, I mean, you could think of, I can't think of any, if you guys think of an example now, but where it's sort of nebulous what you actually are doing by something, right? Is it a stand for it or a stand against it, right? So in those cases, yeah, that's not sufficient, and it's also not clear what you're trying to do, but I think your actions have to be clear enough of what you're trying to do, right? So the pain-sensitive bill that was in the Senate this past week or whatever that didn't get passed was, that's very clear what they're really trying to say, right? Human beings in pain, we need to do something that, doesn't cause more pain for them or whatever, right?
But they would want to be, I feel like most pro-life congressmen are, I don't know, I would imagine they're probably pretty clear about their views, but they would have to be clear in the sense that we understand that this is not enough, that we need to push. At the end of the day, this is not our goal. This is a means.
Yeah, and that's not always clearly stated, because one, there's political compromise going on, and if you a lot of times you explicitly say your end game, then people shut it off at the source, right?
And so does that make that cooperation, or could it potentially make it illicit if you're not willing to say that? Because if you provide the perception of okay, well, yeah, we're happy with the pain of sensitive, but that's really what we want.
Yeah, and how you would convey that is like if you did that and then didn't do anything, try to do anything more, then that would convey that, right? But I don't think you necessarily have to come out and say clearly, like, I'm opposed to abortion, so therefore it's this. Yes.
Kind of going off the same line as that, like in like doing like you mentioned Hitler. Fighting that is like a kind of complex problem because you can't actively be like I'm against Hitler in that situation. So like, do you just have to work on the fact that you know and God knows and that's it? Like,
sometimes, so like think about like Pope Pius XI and then Pius XII with Hitler, right? Like he was like, okay, I tried the direct route where I sent a letter to all of the German bishops, had them read it, condemning fascism. There were repercussions. So what I'm going to do then is work behind the scenes, and I'm going to save as many Jews as I possibly can. I'm going to aid, like if you actually read like history of it, like he was sort of intimately involved in trying to assassinate Hitler, all these things, like, but he had to do it behind the scenes because he was creating more evil by speaking out loudly. All right, so is this kind of clear, like this idea of the art of the possible? So we just have to keep the ball moving and keep chipping away at things, and it's okay to do that. All right. So let's go to our creed. Let's talk a little bit about. Here's my question for you. I know you guys love when I throw up a word that everybody knows the meaning of that nobody can actually define. So here's one. What is liberty? Yes,
in the sense that they used it, in the sense that we ought to use it.
Well, there's nothing wrong with the way they used it per se, right? So they're saying, like, I think, again, people argue this, I think liberty and the pursuit of happiness is really liberty for the pursuit of happiness, right? So remember we talked about pursuit of happiness is really about, like, fulfilling your human nature, living a virtuous life, and so it's liberty for the pursuit of happiness. I don't know that they've necessarily used the term wrongly, but I'm certainly, if you have an idea, then...
Well, I would say, like, we would define liberty kind of in the idea of a virtuous life, like the ability to do what you ought to do. Where at least, I don't know about what they would have defined. I feel like most people would probably read, in those two, would probably read the ability to do what I want to do, and pursuit of happiness might read more the ability to do, similarly, the ability to do what I want to do that I think will make me happy.
Okay.
Is it a freedom from or a freedom for thing?
What's the difference between liberty and freedom? Are they just synonyms, or is there something more?
I would say synonyms.
You think they're synonyms? All right. Anybody else want to get on Casey's side? Just remember, he was the guy on the ground getting stepped on. I don't know if you want to go to his side or not.
I'll get on Casey's side.
All right, so the synonyms. So here's what Fulton Sheen says. He says, freedom means responsibility or mastery over one's own acts. Remember, we talked a lot about, right, that link between responsibility or duty and rights. It means responsibility or mastery of one's own acts. But how can this inner responsibility be better shown externally than by owning some material thing over which one can exercise control? So he's talking about the liberty to own private property. Man is most free on the inside when he owns something on the outside to which he can give the imprint of his personality. Man will know he is responsible only by having responsibility. All right, so what he is saying is that liberty is the external sign of interior freedom. All right, so liberty is essentially a lack of exterior constraints to do what you ought to do, to fulfill your responsibilities. All right, and that's the sense in which the founders meant it. So it doesn't mean, to what you were talking about, Connor, it doesn't mean the separation of responsibilities from rights, right? Like where you have a right to do something and you can do whatever you want. It simply just means that there's no external impediment to exercising your freedom to do what you ought. All right, so think about, just take any one of the sort of rights we have, right? Like what? Free speech, the right to free speech, right? We have a responsibility to tell the truth, right? And so in order to do that, we have to not have any external constraints in place in order to stop us from doing it. Yes?
can you break or just kind of open up the man is most free on the inside when he owns something on the outside to which he can give the imprint of his personality?
Yeah, so we'll talk more about this. I kind of threw it out there as a kind of a teaser for private property. But what he's saying is that what he's trying to get at, which we can talk a little bit about, there's a modern tendency to give away freedom for stability or protection or security. And what he's actually saying is that only when you're free are you secure. So he's saying the man who owns private property or owns his own things doesn't depend on anyone else, and only then is he free. So it's when you have liberty to do things that you're actually free, and that only then are you actually also secure. So what he's trying to get at is the fact that the reason why the church has always talked about private property being a right is because it keeps us free, especially in the economic sort of realm, right? You could see someone who doesn't have private property going and essentially being wage slaves, right? Yes?
So does that mean the apostles were not the most free since they did not own something? So how does voluntary poverty,
Yeah, so now we're sort of in the communism versus the early church kind of thing. So they are most free because they have no attachments to those things, right? So that they have the things they need, they get from God, and that's why communism versus early church is always the sort of juxtaposition of them is always wrong, because communism enforces it on you, whereas a vow of poverty in a monastic community is freely chosen, right? And only then can you say, I'm free of these things. Yes?
I have a question. You mentioned free speech and that we shouldn't have anything to hinder us from telling the truth. What if you have a job that requires you not to tell the truth?
A job is wrong.
Yeah, that's not a good job. I guess it depends on what you mean by you have to
Undercover cop.
constantly lie, or just you can't tell people stuff.
You bit of both. It's I know it's a weird statement to make, but
yeah. So
that
the morality of being a spy, for example, right?
Yeah, that's what I'm basically asking you.
Yeah. Yeah, I would say that.
Can you be a good Catholic and be a spy?
The whole assassination thing, I'm also kind of curious. Can we assassinate people?
Yeah, that would be
Hitler.
At what point?
Again, that doesn't say it's right.
So, in the government, if you have a government job, you have to sign off papers and you have to go through this thing of are you willing to kill your family and to lie to them enough in order to learn this information? Is that, as a Catholic, should you deny those rights? Should you say, I cannot do this?
Yeah.
Okay. I'm just asking, because,
Yeah, I mean, there's ways, the Vatican had spies, especially during World War II, the Vatican had spies. There's ways to be a spy that don't actually, have to lie.
No, I agree with that. I'm just asking.
Yeah, but something that's I will kill my family before I, anyone that asks you to kill your family, it's probably not
No, but, it's an actual genuine question that is asked before you, are you willing to allow your family to die before you give out this information?
Do you put that on your resume? You know what? In a job interview, you're look, I totally would be willing to kill my kids.
I know it's a ridiculous question, but it's just something because growing up around military special ops, that's a thing that they have to convince.
Yeah, there's a lot of I mean, they do. It'd be good if Stephen Hinkle was here, right? He would send me stuff, and he'd be like, "Look, I learned this in military ethics," and I hope he listens to this, by the way. And he's and they show movie clips, and they show something somebody would do. One of them he showed me was from I forget the name of the movie. It had Nicole Kidman and George Clooney in it, and there's a scene where the guy's ordering him to shoot the hostage so that they can shoot the terrorist, right? And he's like, well, the professor said you could do that. He's like, Is that really true? And the answer was no, right? And we're actually talking about why you can't do that a little further on when we talk about proportionality of ends and means. And but yeah, I mean, it takes if you were to ask him, I'm sure he would say it's hard to navigate some of those things, right? And to keep your moral compass.
Yeah, because that was basically my dad's job, and he struggled with that.
Yeah, of course. I mean, that would be really, really hard, right? And then to have to make a split decision in a moment that would not be that would be really difficult. But yeah, I would say any job that says you may have to kill your family, probably not one you want to go for. Yes, Connor.
But you continuing Thomas's line is just wrong. Period. Like there's no justification. There's no way you could ever lie that would be permissible.
Yeah. So lying is always and everywhere wrong.
Okay.
Yeah.
And therefore, like undercover cops, insofar as they must lie, or insofar as lying could potentially be required for their job, or just
Yes.
Always never wrong.
Yes. Yeah. But again, there are ways around that, right? Like in which you don't have to we always use the classic example of Athanasius, right? Where they're like looking for him, and he's like, "Have you seen Athanasius?" He's like, "Yeah, I saw him over there," right? And he really did see him over there, but that's not really could be interpreted many different ways. So
I like that when recently the Bishop of Milan was hiding Jews in his bishop's palace, and when the Nazis came, he threw the doors open wide and said, "I'm sure you won't find any Jews here."
yeah,
Wow.
yeah, and some of that is just like when you do the right thing, like. You have to be willing to suffer for doing something like that's good, right? Like that's just the reality of it. Yes, Con.
No, I've spoken about that with someone before about like just the line, the kind of absolute prohibition on lying, and I think you can reason to it. You can reason to it in the sense, okay, it's wrong. Just as a moral person, getting anything wrong. But it's way easier to believe it, or way easier to act on it. It's not quite as repulsive to because like the example with the Jews. A lot of people would say, I wouldn't, if the Nazi knocks on the door and says, "Are you hiding Jews in your house?" I either say yes, in which they die, or I say no, and I lie, and then they survive.
Or you just don't answer.
Or you say, but in that case, like. You just stand there, just don't say anything. They're probably going to be like, how about the window?
I'm not sure. But I would reply because you don't know if they're there still or not, shorting your cat.
Yeah, there can be things like that.
Yeah,
Like,
legitimately just shorting your cat.
Go ahead, Connor. So what would you do?
So, the idea of saying, they didn't even say, okay, well, I know that, death is not the end, and therefore, like, the worst thing you could do to me is not the worst thing that could happen to me. It's a lot easier for me to say, okay, well, I'll just never lie, versus naturally reasoning that seems very, it seems very difficult and very much someone just wouldn't like it. Is there a way to explain it?
Yeah, so to absolutize it from the natural law, you mean? You could harm against the truth is the highest good of man, right? And so any action against the highest good of man would be the worst thing you can do, like kind of thing, right? But it's hard to reason to that, like without faith, right? Because ultimately, like we don't like to talk about sin as offense against God, like we don't say that anymore. But lying is one of those ones that, like, if you grasp that it's an offense against God, because why are you in the situation that you're in? God's providence, right? Like, so God ordained for you to be in this situation for all eternity, right? And for you to try to make up your own reality, which is what you do when you lie, like, is to say that my reality is better than your reality, right? And so, like, I think lying is more repugnant for a Christian than it would be, like, for someone else if they grasp the fact that lying is ultimately, like, an offense against God. Yes, Ron?
Not to spend too much more time with kind of undercover cropping, but I guess there are some things that you can kind of pull off and be clever about. But for something like establishing a cover story, I'm not going to go up and say, "Hi, yeah, I'm Ryan. That's what I do." I'm like, "Oh, biochem at State." That's the truth. But that's not what I want the person to know. So I'd have to be like, "Oh, I'm Cheryl."
Yeah, so there are, this would be this would probably be a whole class of, how to avoid lying as an undercover cop.
And that be your extra life session?
Yeah, but that can be, some of it can be, too, some of it can be that you're acting as well, right? And so it's not necessarily, all of it isn't necessarily lying.
I'm in transportation. I drive people around in my back seat.
Yeah, it's just... Yes, Connor. If we go any deeper down this rabbit hole, though,
we can say this at the end. Could you talk about the sin of simulation? Because I've heard mention of this. It sounds like it's just lying. The example I've been given was, the Athanasius thing walks up and it's somebody is the guy walks up to Athanasius and says, which way, you see a criminal run by you and the cop runs up and he went to your right and the cop will say, which way did he go? And you point left. It's I didn't lie. I didn't say anything.
Yeah, that would be a lie, though, because you're either by word or action, you're deliberately like deceptive and like
Deception is not a sin.
yeah. But by word or deed, if you deliberately deceive someone who has a right to the truth, then it would be a lie, right? So in other words, you could, like let's just say he, for just reasons, should be chasing the criminal, right? Like you have to tell him the truth.
But would you say Nazis had a right to know where the Jews were?
No.
But you still couldn't lie.
No, you still can't lie, right? But you can't you have to be clear in your answers to someone who has a right to the truth.
Which, okay, we can, okay.
Yeah.
What do we do if we're not sure if the person he's chasing stole a loaf of bread that he had a right to because no one else would give him a loaf of bread? So if you're unsure if that,
yeah, I would say not to be a judge and just assume that the cop is after him for just reasons. So anyway, back to liberty and rights.
It's one of the best tangents we've had all over.
Okay, I do wonder, why is lying, people ask me more than anything, it's why is lying so fascinating? You're just trying to figure, how can I get away with things?
It's just such a simple thing and such an easy thing, and it's something that is ingrained in our society to do. How do we not do it? It's a big question. Because everyone always says in my ethics class it's okay to lie, especially the children. It's a thing.
Don't even start Santa Claus. Don't even start there. Anyway. Liberty is born of the recognition of personal rights and flourishes in the recognition of social responsibilities. All right. Totally off track with liberty, so we'll come back to it. Though I just want to set this up because the next few weeks we'll talk, after break, we're going to talk about sort of freedom of religion, freedom of conscience, all those things, all right? And we'll keep coming back. But just to know that liberty is something, it's just essentially the no external constraints to do the things that you ought to do. Yes?
This is probably covered later. Can the government give a right? Can you never give a freedom that God has not given?
Give me an example of that. So,
freedom of conscience or freedom of religion?
I'll hold that. That is a total rabbit hole if we start. Yeah. Okay. All right. So what I want to do is talk a little bit about navigating. We're going to talk a lot about abortion to sort of help us, because this is the big issue. So why does the church care so much about abortion? Okay. Babies are part of our religion. That's a classic on Keegan. Say that again, Alice.
It degrades what it is to be a person.
Yeah, so it's almost emblematic, right, of a whole cultural sort of understanding of what it means to be a person, right? And we're going to talk a little bit about that. What were you going to say, Connor?
I'll be slightly controversial and say they don't want babies to go to the window.
Oh, yeah. Go ahead.
Kind of like what Allison said, that's how if you can kill a kid, why can't you kill a whole full-grown adult?
Yeah, and we're going to see where that comes up, right?
It's a slippery slope kind of idea. So, if you're killing children that you can deem as not human, can you say then that someone who can't think for themselves, like a baby, that's a person, should you kill them too? Are they just a waste of space or not?
How many of you heard about, again, another sort of piece of legislation this past week that didn't pass? Was the Born Alive.
Yeah.
And the argument is that a fetus that has been born, this is the exact language, the argument, a fetus that has been born doesn't have a right to life.
Wait, who used that argument?
Well, if you read, that's the tagline, sort of that was literally in the New York Times. A fetus that has been born does not have the right to life.
I know they don't. I just have to ask for clarification. Are they able to clarify the difference between fetus that has been born and...
Well, I used to think that a fetus was the thing inside inside the womb, and then we called it a baby when it was born. But apparently, a fetus can still be a fetus when it's born.
Which makes no sense.
Yeah. So then, the verbal gymnastics part is really. Yeah, find that. I'm pretty sure it's the New York Times.
The people arguing against that bill, though, didn't I didn't hear a lot of that. I heard more. You're going force a doctor to, A, this isn't an issue, like this doesn't happen a lot, and B, you're going to force the doctor to take care of a, miscarried, dying baby instead of taking the mom. Those are the arguments I heard, but I didn't hear.
Okay. All right, so let's talk a little bit about, so how do we sort of penetrate through all of this, right? And I think it comes down to one thing. Every discussion you have about abortion, every time you talk about it, you got to steer it in one direction, okay? So imagine for a second that somebody comes in, runs in the room and says to you, "Can I kill it?" Right? Can I kill it? What's your first question? What is it, right? Like, ultimately, that is the question, right? Like, is it your next door neighbor? Is it a roach? What is it? Is it your little brother? Like, so the it is what I want to sort of get at, right? So if you can show that it's a person, then the sort of the legal rights take over, okay? And this is exactly what Roe versus Wade said. If the suggestion of personhood of the preborn is established, the abortion case, of course, collapses. For the fetus's right to life is then guaranteed specifically by the 14th Amendment. All right.
So this is the winning side. This is what Roe v. Wade said.
Yeah. So they essentially, like, the question is, what is it? Okay. And so let's talk a little bit about how to talk about what is it. Okay. The good thing about this is that it's not really even a religious argument. It's really a scientific argument. So do you guys know who Dr. Bernard Nathanson was? Okay, so Dr. Bernard Nathanson was one of the co-founders, I think, of NARAL. And he said he was probably responsible for 35,000 abortions in his life. But he also became a Catholic convert. And have you guys ever heard of the movie Silent Scream? So if you want to be disturbed, there's a movie, I think you can pretty much watch it on YouTube, called Silent Scream, where what he did was took ultrasound video that he had from when he was performing abortions and showed, like, the baby dying. Really, really powerful. You can see, like, the child moving away from the needle. You can see them, like, almost literally, like, looking like they're screaming. But the first sort of thing you have to do is move people off of the whole religious question. All right? Because this is a question we can talk about using natural law and science. All right? It has nothing to do, it's not a religious question. All right? So here's what Dr. Nathanson said. Modern technologies have convinced us that beyond question, the unborn child is simply another human being, another member of the human community, indistinguishable in every way from any of us. All right, so what I want to do is sort of dive into this sort of scientific premise, all right? Now, Ronald Reagan was probably the most pro-life president. He wrote, I think, 2 or 3 articles in Human Life Review on the personhood of the unborn. And so it was during his presidency that the question really started getting tossed around. And so they had a what was called the Human Life Bill. And here's what their report said. Physicians, biologists, and other scientists agree that conception marks the beginning of the life of a human being, a being that is alive and is a member of the human species. There's overwhelming agreement on the point in countless medical, biological, and scientific writings. Of course, the church says the same thing. Conception is the beginning. From the time that the ovum is fertilized, a life is begun, which is neither that of the father nor the mother. It is rather the life of a new human being with his own growth. It would never be made human if it were not human already. Modern genetic science brings valuable confirmation. It has demonstrated that from the first instance, there is established the program of what this living being will be, a man. All right, so let's talk a little bit about how we can sort of talk about this simply. All right, so there's 2 premises, all right? First of all, it's not a fertilized egg. So the conceptus is a distinct, unified, self-integrating human organism, meaning it has its own DNA. All right, and so if it has its own DNA, what does it mean? What does that mean? Yeah, it's a person, but what does it, so if it has its own DNA, what does it need? Like, does it need anything, like, is everything that it ever needs sort of contained in the DNA? Is it self-directed? Okay, what do we call self-directed beings? Alive and independent, right? Like they're not part of something else, all right? So that they need the same things that everyone else needs, right? Water, food, oxygen, and a healthy interaction with this natural environment. All right. So from the moment of conception, nothing is added from the outside to the person. Right. Everything is self-directed. Of course, it has to eat. Of course, it has to have an environment which it can grow safely. All of those things. All right. But the reason why you sort of talk about this, though, is because you'll often hear people say it's like a potential person. How many of you guys have ever heard that? Okay, so if it's a potential person, potential X has to currently be Y. So when someone asks you that, you have to ask, well, what is it currently? Okay. Yes, Connor.
Just, I guess, how many people do you think on the kind of pro-choice side of it have a deep philosophical conviction that it is not a human being, or more like it's a convenient excuse to do what I already want to do?
It depends. So I think the majority of people just kind of that are in favor of it just kind of swallow it. Like the hardcore sort of pro-choice people, honestly, if push comes to shove, they don't care. Like they don't care that it's a person or not, right? But the majority of people that think, sort of in a compassionate way, think, well, that should be an option, or they honestly don't know. Like they think that it's a glob of, like they've bought like hooks, line, and sinker, but it's a glob of cells or whatever. Yes, right.
More often when I've had this conversation with you, they take the social justice warrior stance of it of, well, because, if someone got raped and blah, 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 if they're super poor already and you have a child and they're going to be in that situation and blah, blah, blah. Well, the adoption system is already so messed up, so blah, blah, blah. And they very, very rarely acknowledge the fact that, there is a human life at stake here. Like, they just jump over that.
Yeah, you kind of you kind of blah 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 yada yada, like the really important part though. Like so, very often you have to force them to say, "So I can kill it then," right?
And that's when you force them to kind of face that. They get really awkward.
Yes.
And they don't want to acknowledge it. And then they're like, "Well, it's like a clump of cells," and then they start trying to compare the value of the clump of cells to a grown human being with it.
Right. But biologically, we can sort of show it's not a clump of cells, right? Yes, Casey.
I think 6 years ago you would have found people firmly convinced it was not a human person. I think today, if anyone who's on the pro-choice side of willing to, or rather, who has this discussion, will very quickly acknowledge its personhood, and now it just doesn't matter. Like I have a friend who believes in infanticide. Now it's not a person. Now it's a person, but it's not a person who has a value higher than the mom.
Yeah. So it's back to the slippery slope kind of the principle, right? Which is the dangerous part, always. All right, so we said it has its own DNA, it's self-directed. So let's look a little bit about, so how is it different then? Okay, because someone will say, yeah, that's true, but how is it different? All right, so let's look at all the ways an unborn child is different than a newborn child. All right? So the first way is obviously size. Okay?
We have the best interest in our conclusion.
Yeah. Does the size of the person affect their status as persons? Okay, is Taco Fall more of a person than me? Taco Fall's like 7 foot. I don't know how tall is he. 7'7".
Taco
Yeah.
Fall.
That's his name, right? Isn't that his name?
Oh, my Taco Fall.
No, it's his basketball player. It's like 7'7".
What is it?
His name. Okay, let me find someone who's gigantic. Is Goliath? Is Goliath more of a person than David? Is that better?
Okay, that is a much better analogy.
Yeah, sorry. I remember last year I used a weightlifting example, and all of you looked like cross-eyed. I was like, I'm not going to use those again. Yeah, I got to know my crowd. All right. Is some NBA player that's taller than me? More of a person than me.
60% of the guys in this room, though.
Dude, Casey, man, you are pushing it today.
Why you were standing on his head? Yeah, really
all right, you know what, though? No, here's the problem, though. I am so short I can't see over the computer to answer any more of your questions. Done. All right, so we all agree that size has nothing to do with it, right? So they're different in size. Thanks, Casey. How about the level of development? All right, so they're different on the level of development. And anywhere else do we see the level of development mattering? All right, so is a 7-year-old more of a person than a 2-year-old? Okay. How about the environment? Does it matter where someone is? Does it matter whether they are in Jamaica or in this room? Right, still a person. What about their degree of dependency? Does the fact that one is dependent on others for survival determine their personhood? Right, so this is one of those ones that people will maybe balk at. Is there any difference between a healthy 18-year-old and someone who's on dialysis? Any moral difference?
No.
All right. So, are there any other differences between the person in the womb versus the person outside of the womb? Yes.
Maybe just to go with number 2, like the ability to feel pain and also brain activity.
Okay.
Which would probably go into 2 as well.
Whether your organs are inside or outside you.
All right. So we'll come back to that. So when we get to the definition of a person, so I'm going to have you guys define it first. Start working on it. Did you have a question, Casey? Because Connor has his hand up. Connor, what's your question?
So I guess I have a question and I have comments on what Andrew's going to say, which I might be jumping ahead with. But is there any of these? I mean, I think we all are going to agree that these things do not affect the moral status of a child in the womb. Is there one that tends to be challenged more than others? If you listen to say number 2.
Yeah, I would say it's either 2 or 4. I think I would agree. Allison said 4, and I would say 4 also. Go ahead.
Yeah, the argument that they make, especially at the college, is that they're just parasites that live off of you. So if they're living off of Allison, don't make that face. So if they're living off of you, you have a right to say whether or not they should live since they depend upon you.
Okay, so how do you respond to that?
Why don't your parents kill you? I mean, yeah, that would be my response. I'm like, so then why don't your parents just want to kill you? And then their response typically back to that is, well, they could have if they wanted. And
that's a little disturbing, but...
So most of our society is disturbed. So.
Does that admit that they're alive and just deny the fact that they're human?
Yeah, so remember, we're trying to get at showing that they're...
It's not alive.
Yeah, so the parasite thing obviously doesn't work.
That does not hold.
So the classic sort of argument is a woman wakes up and she's hooked up to another person and has to keep them alive for 9 months or whatever. What's wrong with that argument?
That's not how it works.
Yeah, but not how it works. But what's the other problem with it, which is missing in the whole thing?
It's not natural. It's not a
well, whose fault is it that the child is there?
That's not the argument.
That would immediately
Yeah,
bring
we
rape
can't use that.
into that.
Yeah, so we're gonna get to the rape thing in just a second.
The extraordinary means would then be the.
Let's just say in the ordinary sense, right, where the exception isn't the rule.
I think whether or not it's your fault or not, I think at the end of the day it comes down to the way that a pregnancy, the way that you carry a child, you are designed to do that. Whether or not that's what you're designed to do. And if you're designed to do it, then it's no longer considered a parasite. When a parasite attaches onto it, that animal is not designed to care for them. You are designed to care for them.
Yes.
So
Yeah, the parasite thing doesn't.
You can't define it as being a parasite.
Certainly doesn't fly. All right, so we're going to come back to the level of development, degree of dependency when we get to it, and I'm going to let Casey ask the question.
No, I was talking about you. I was actually waiting for violence arguments. So
Okay, yeah, we'll get to the rape and incest argument. Yes, Connor.
So on to Andrew's point about brain development. Now, I think the Catholic response. Do you want me to go into this, or do you want?
Go for it. It's better coming from you.
I think the Catholic response to that is going to be, well, the definition of a human person is that you are a body and soul composite, which means regardless of whether or not the matter inside your body is developed enough to have kind of mental function, you have a soul that's attached to you that actually is where your intellect and your will is. While Aristotle would probably say that you can naturally reason to the soul, most in our society, I think, would probably would at least might deny the existence of a soul and say that it's more of a matter of faith. And only human intellect exists inside your mind.
Okay. Sorry, there were two. girls passing by and they stop to look at them.
Little slides.
All right, so let's look at the sort of the argument from skepticism. Okay, first of all, that we can't know what it is. All right, so you can set up sort of a little matrix of possibilities. All right, so let's just suppose you are driving down the road and you see something in the road that's dark, and you think that could be a person. Right? Maybe not. All right, what's the reasonable thing to do? Hit the gas, keep going, pull over and see, go around it. What's the reasonable thing to do? Well, we all agree that the not reasonable thing to do would be to run it over, right? All right, so that's our sort of down in the bottom left-hand corner, in the bottom right-hand corner, and in the top left-hand corner. So if we don't know what it is, and we still run it over and we think it could be a person, that's pretty negligent, right? All right, so if I say to you, like, that could be a person, and you kill it anyway, at the very least, if you're right, you're still sort of negligent, right? You just didn't care. All right, so what happens if it is a person? What happens if it's if it is a person and you don't know what it is? We call that manslaughter, right? So if you okay, it really is a person. I didn't really think it was, but I still hit the gas and just kept going. That's manslaughter, right? What about if it is a person and you know it? So that's murder, right? And what about if it is not a person and you know that? Then it would be okay to kill it, right? But they just said they don't know that, okay? Do you guys sort of follow what we're doing here?
What's the answer?
I don't know. I have no idea. No idea why that's what you think. Maybe
Did you not?
fat fingers. I probably did, but it's probably fat fingers. So the only sort of moral. Oh, I know. That's the only time you're ever right. Like, it's if you know it's not a person and you kill it, it's okay. All right. That's the only time you're safe if you don't know. Okay. So again, this doesn't prove that it's a person, but we always would sort of give the benefit of the doubt to the fact that it could be a person, right? So the reasonable thing for someone to do that doesn't know, they say, I don't know, then you better know before you kill it. Go ahead, Colin.
So, devil's advocate, would you say, let's say I'm carrying someone, let's say it's on a one-way street in a tunnel. My options, I can't just go around.
Are you just trying to pull a trolley?
But I have a person in my backseat who's bleeding out. I need to get to the hospital. I have a doubt of whether it's a person. Because I think the argument they might respond to that is say, well, the good or the potential evil to the mother of having to care for this child and then raise the rest of it, all these different things, say, oh, this is too grave an evil to make her suffer on it. I don't know. So to go back to the example, I have somebody in my backseat bleeding out. Like, if I don't press on the gas and drive over this person, drive over this thing I don't know what it is, this person's going to bleed out.
Yeah, so I would.
Sorry. Yeah, like, you know how to stop bleeding, you cauterize the wound, you put bandages on it, you press them in, like, that's what you do. You tourniquet it.
I'm a Google smart car and I
Wait, so if we're programming the smart car, what will happen? Like, so you're saying you're trying to program the smart car whether it should keep going or swerve around.
But no, your point is you can't stop, basically.
The point is my two options are either go or stop. And if I stop, this person's going to die. If I go, there's a possibility I'm going to kill this person.
Okay, but so let's just you're hypothetical. Let's just say, as far as we could go with that in an absolute emergency, abortion would be okay. That's the best you could do with that. Now, I'm not saying that's true, but I'm just saying if someone were to say that, like give that as an example, that's the best they can do is to say, yeah, in an emergency, like where the mother is absolutely going to die, then abortion would be okay.
My point would be, it's like if you have to stop, because I think she's not bleeding out. It's just going to be inconvenient for the period of time that you have to stop.
Yeah, because the reason why I say that is because like what they're really trying to argue for is take an exception and give like the exception be the rule, where they get abortion on demand from this this rare case where somebody's life isn't.
I don't think he was saying the mother's life is in danger. He was more equating someone bleeding out in his backseat to just pregnancy in general.
So I'm saying a significant evil, that they would probably say, okay, well, this is a significant evil, therefore the mother, why would we make her suffer this significant evil? Now, you could take issue with the idea, well, how significant of an evil is it compared to the possibility of killing someone?
Yes. Ryan, what were you going to say?
Just to verify it, prenatal births are a thing. Preterm, babies being born before they're actually to term. It's a thing, and babies live successfully after that. It's not a terribly pleasant thing at the time, but the mom and the baby both live successfully. It's a thing that people forget about when they throw situations in your face.
And also too, you're typically supposed to give the best absolute chance for that life to live, even if that means that you have to die. My dad, he worked in the OBGYN part, and he just all day he basically sat with these women who were giving birth. He had one mom dying only once, and it was really hard on him. But the mom made that choice against, I think, the husband's will, but made the choice because she was I would rather give the chance of the child living. The kid did live, so it's kind of a weird act of love in some ways. I'm yeah, that sucks, and it's a hard decision to make, but.
No, it's not. It's not a weird act of love, right? That is the definition of love, right? To make a gift of yourself for the sake of another person.
That's what pregnancy and creating life allows us to do. And so I think there needs to be an understanding there of this is love. This is what we do for it.
Yeah, and some of that too is again the language. I think we talked about this: the framing it versus the right to choose versus the right to life, and not taking on a level of sort of responsibility of what are a mother's responsibilities for her children. Right? And the reason why you use that language is because the awareness that not only is there something living in you, you're actually a mother now, right? And you actually do things that mothers do, and you actually have responsibilities and duties attached to being a mother. All right, so let's sort of tackle some of these objections. We got off track a little bit, but let's try to come back. All right, so here's argument sort of one. It is a human being, but not a person. Okay? So the idea is a human being is a person and thus intrinsically valuable if they have the present capacity to exhibit certain properties or functions. Okay? So you could have sentience, you could have ability to feel pain, you could have ability to reason, you could have self-awareness, you could have take out the trash, you could have anything up there. Right? If they're old enough to take out the trash, they're a person. Or cut my grass.
Do they have to have all of these or just one?
Well, I don't know. See, that's the thing. So if you ask someone to press them, right, it's completely and totally arbitrary.
Wait, yeah, I've never cut grass. Does that mean I'm not a person?
In my house, you would not be.
Okay, so no.
You would live under the stairs.
Harry Potter!
The real problem with this comes down to elderly people in their last stages of life revert in their development. So you have people who lose the ability to speak, you have people who lose the ability to control the way they use the bathroom and lose the ability to eat. They lose the function that they gained in their childhood. And so now you're not only saying a fetus is not a person, but an old woman is not a person.
Yeah, and that's exactly what is how that's youth. All abortion is euthanasia flipped over, right?
It's an important thing in that discussion to bring up because a lot of people are yeah, but I believe I should be allowed to end my life if I don't have the quality of life to decide. Then you have to bring up the point so if you're in there, can I come in and kill you if you don't want to be killed? And they're going to say no.
So first of all, you can't define what a person is by functions, right? You can't define what a thing is by what it does. That's the first thing, right? But the second thing, this is a little bit scarier, is who decides what those things are? There's no objective.
You got green eyes.
Yeah. Right, and so why did Hitler kill all the Jews that he came into contact with? Because he thought they weren't people, right? This is the way it always operates, right? It always operates where if you everyone's oh no, you can't kill a person, but then they take personhood away, right? And one of the ways they do it is to decide what a person is, right? By what they can do.
So with this premise, it would be okay to kill a human being, but not okay to kill a person.
Yeah. Yes. So some people will say it's a human being, but not a person. if they can't do this thing. So in other words, they're going, oh yeah, it has human DNA, it has to be human, it's not something else. It's clearly...
When has this argument ever led us to bad results? I mean,
Yeah, I mean, it's,
slavery.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's exactly the case, right? Like, by the way, this is also the sort of the end game of identity politics, by the way, where you're defined by something that's just as simple as your skin color. Yes?
I'm just really confused with the difference between a human being and a person.
Well, so remember, there's a little bit of, there's always some verbal gymnastics going on, right? Like, and this is why, so how would you untwist this then? Like you started it, like you said, like, okay, difference between a human being and a person. All right, so let's see if we can come up with some definitions for a person. What do you guys think of this one? A person is one who is presently performing some of the personal acts.
No.
Sorry, what?
Yeah.
So if I define a person by someone who is...
Person, which is part of person, and it's just a bad definition.
Chris?
Well, no, because sleeping. So, yes.
Wow, that's pretty good. Doug is following along. He's right on top of it.
Like I've been in here.
All right, so the someone who falls asleep ceases to be a person, right? Because they're no longer talking, using reason. Yes, Keegan.
Wouldn't that also mean that, like, a computer that can make speech is a person because it is presently performing a personal act?
I'm sure people.
Perhaps. Yeah. All right, so each one of these is not true, but I want to sort of just... All right, so we press a little bit like, okay, yeah, you're right. So those people that are sleeping... all right, so now we're going to go towards capacity. All right, so they currently have the capacity to do some sort of personal acts. Say that again. Yeah. So Casey's example of coma.
People to
What's that? Yeah, that's what Allison said. All right, how about this one? A person is one with a present capacity for performing some future act. So, in other words, when they come out of the coma, so they might be in a coma now, but they have the capacity to at least reason later on.
So, like eliminating anyone who's disabled who would never be able to walk.
Okay. Or how about somebody that's dying?
Yeah.
Okay.
Also, that would work for
exactly.
Yeah.
If you have capacity.
All right. So let's see if we can come up with a definition now that we've sort of eliminated those three. A person is someone. This is John Paul II's definition, by the way. Person is someone with an inherent capacity for performing personal acts, given the right conditions, including time and growth. This includes all persons, even those in the womb. All right. Why can a child in the womb? Why will they grow up to be somebody who can reason? Because they have an inherent capacity to do that, right? Right? Might they never reach that capacity? No, right? So the link is to its inherent capacity, not to whether they're actually exercising something.
Can you define inherent?
This thing natural, like.
I mean, like no cyborg will ever be a person.
Right. So what a thing is, and this, remember I think we talked about this when we talked about the culture of death. What was at sort of the heart of the culture of death was this emphasis of doing over being. Worrying what a thing can do before you know what it is, right? And so doing follows from what a thing is, right? It doesn't define what a thing is, okay? All right, so let's look at some other arguments.
Ooh, this is a great one.
All right, so personhood begins at viability. So how would you talk about this? Go ahead. Casey, I've never seen you so excited.
People have talked about this one before, the idea of so a child in 1940 at 6 months is not viable, but a child today at 6 months is, which is a fine argument. Even better is a child in West Virginia in the rural is not viable at 6 months. But in New York City, I'm picking a random number, at 6 months they are viable. So how in the world could location impact?
All right, so we're back to my sled, right?
Explain, Casey.
So, like,
what is your definition of viability?
Yeah, because
matching mine.
So like the idea that depending on the technology you have is going to depend whether or not you're viable.
Okay.
So in West Virginia, you're not
Viable
going to
just meaning that if you're born, you'll survive.
Okay.
Yeah.
But yeah, I
How
mean,
do
I
you
would say
define
that would be the
viability?
place to start the argument. So how do you define viability?
That's what I was
And it's like, so if you're just saying that it's the ability to survive when you're born, well, that just means that you're able to survive under certain situations.
Yeah.
But I'm not viable if I stop eating. So,
That doesn't make any less.
and yeah, like, so it's just like,
We all know you're a cyborg, so that's
Anthony
Right.
would not survive without me, so
yeah.
All right, so are we clear on the sort of the viability? Because this is the sort of the big one, right? Would a personhood depend on something as accidental as available technology? Okay. What about at birth?
you hear C-section baby?
Okay, we'll count C-section babies as birth. We won't split hairs.
Distraction dish. I'm trying to celebrate his birthday. He celebrates his extraction dish.
Oh,
It's a change of location. A child stops developing at a certain point in the 9 months, and it is prepared for life between like week 30, whatever, and week 40.
Yes,
It
so
doesn't matter.
we go back to again our sled, right? So we said, like, does location have any change in moral status? Does something magical happen when a baby passes through the birth canal and comes out?
It
Like
is
what
coated with a microbiome from the
is that the magical?
mother.
That's the magical thing that happens.
it's pretty.
All right, let's talk about the hard cases. Okay. All right, we'll start with the rape and incest. All right.
There's
So-
like no context on these slides, so people walking by are getting this.
I don't know. I mean, I had an audience like a minute ago. Like she literally did a double take. She's like, all right. So let's look at.
if you have questions.
This is how like bioethics is taught, by the way, like in the sort of secular realm. It is argued that in these tragic cases, talking about rape and incest, the great value of the mental health of a woman who becomes pregnant as a result of rape or incest can best be safeguarded by abortion. It is also said that a pregnancy caused by rape or incest is a result of a grave injustice, and that the victim should not be obliged to carry the fetus to viability. This would keep reminding her for 9 months of the violence committed against her and would just increase her mental anguish. It is reasoned that the value of the woman's mental health is greater than the value of the fetus. In addition, it is maintained that the fetus is an aggressor against the woman's integrity and personal life. It is only just and morally defensible to repel an aggressor, even by killing him, if that is the only way to defend personal and human values. It is concluded then that abortion is justified in these cases. What's wrong with this argument?
Him? By killing him?
You can't punish someone for someone else's crimes.
Okay, so all right, so let's talk just in general too. Remember, I think we already touched on this. The fact that this is used usually as a smokescreen, where what people are trying to argue for is abortion on demand. So very often, if people are stuck on this, just simply say, "Okay, I'll give you those," and then make them talk about abortion. Huh?
Is that a lie?
I'll give it to, I mean, I'm willing to concede it for right now. I didn't say I would give it to him permanently. I just
Because the question is, why are you voting for laws that allow it in more than these cases?
yeah.
So,
Yeah,
that's
what we
so we agree that the other 98% of cases should be
Right, and so this is why, like, even like pro-life politicians will often allow for, like, tolerate the rape and incest sort of exception to things.
Because they're hoping it'll allow them to get through and restrict it.
Yes, yeah, because it's less than 2% of like abortions that are performed are actually performed on people who have been raped or victims of incest, which is obviously way more than there should be. But the point is that if you could eliminate 98% of abortions, then you should do it. Okay. All right, so that there's the smokescreen sort of aspect, right? What else is wrong with this argument? Casey, go back to what you were saying.
You cannot punish someone for someone else's crimes. Like if I shoot someone can't imprison Keegan for the rest of his life.
Okay. I think I shared this story with you guys before about going to see the movie Just Mercy. You guys have seen it?
I read the book.
Yeah, so there's a movie Just Mercy. It's about a guy who's wrongfully accused, put on death row, and eventually gets out. Not to ruin it for you, but it would have been really anticlimactic if at the end it's like he's sitting in the electric chair. Anyway, he gets out, and so I'm leaving the movie theater, and there's two women walking in front of me, And one woman says to the other woman, wow, that was pretty powerful. And she's like, yeah, but they're so backwards in Alabama. Like, they make you keep your kid if you're raped. They won't even let you have an abortion. And, like, I did, like, a total double take. I'm like, she totally missed the point that it was an analogy for what she was just talking about, right? Somebody else had been caught up in someone else's crime, accused of it, and almost put to death. And yet she said, okay, this kid who was part of someone else's crime, just an onlooker, should die. Right? So this idea that somebody else should be punished for someone else's crime. Right? So now how many victims are there? 2, right? And now the victim becomes a perpetrator. Right? So there is that aspect of it. Go ahead.
Because I feel like most pro-choicers would not even argue that they're punishing the baby, though. Really what it comes down to is valuing the woman's mental health over the life of the baby.
Yeah, like you're gonna forget you got raped just because you have an abortion.
You're right. But even then, it's saying that like mental health is less important than a life, which I mean it's important, but it's not.
Yeah, hold on to that thought for a second, because I want to ask where that came from. Go ahead.
Also, too, like the woman's not gonna forget like 9 months of she's carrying a baby. She's gonna remember she got raped. Doesn't matter. Also, too, like mental health. I'm sorry, but killing something also too is not gonna help your mental health.
No.
Yeah. At the end of the day. Whether or not like we really want to admit that or not, in fact, it tends to like make it worse and then causes other issues later on. Sometimes, if the abortion isn't carried out well, it's a medical procedure that has like risk of complications, just like giving birth. Both can end up in not a good situation.
Mm-hmm.
And one though actually has better potential of being taken care of better, and that's going through with it.
Well, every abortion, at least one person dies, right? Like,
yeah, I mean, people still die from it.
A lot of people slip up and say like abortion should be allowed, and they're split up to the mother or the child.
It can
It happens so many times. It's hilarious.
Ryan, what were you going to say?
Yeah.
Go ahead, Keegan.
2 things. One, do you know if they're conceding that it is like a human person life, whatever you want to call it?
I don't think he's saying one way or the other. Like, I would. He's using the word fetus so that he doesn't get sort of caught up in that. Where does this idea come from that mental health is more important than the life of the child? Go ahead, Con.
Can I answer two things? Number one, I want to say idealism is that the real what's in your head is actually more important than what's in reality. And then the other thing, I mean, at least in this argument, in order to attribute aggression and moral aggression to somebody, I mean, don't you have to kind of attribute at least some degree of independence to them? Like you would, it doesn't necessarily have to be an intelligent. An animal can be aggressive against you, but you can't say it's.
Yeah, I mean, we talked about it earlier about like it's not an aggressive sort of. The child is not aggressive towards a mother. Yes, Keegan.
And there's a second thing, like, would this argument also hold up if you were to say, a woman was raped, got pregnant, had the child, and now they're 15, and if it would make her feel better by killing it, like,
there is no difference. Like,
or if somebody has a mental condition where they, like the serial killer, like they want to go out and murder people, like, oh, if that makes them feel better mentally, they can go out and kill people. Like, I mean, obviously that's not right, but.
So this idea of mental health is actually enshrined in the Supreme Court. Doe versus Bolton is the case, right? If you want to Google it, you can look at it. But essentially, it just said when the health of the mother is in jeopardy, then she should be able to have an abortion. The issue is they don't define health anything other than mental health, physical health, economic health, family health. Those are the 4 things. So that ambiguity is there, right? So that you could use the same sort of argument sort of along Keegan's lines, right? Is later on, let's say, like a husband becomes crippled or something, and he's causing all this emotional distress in his wife. Like by that same logic, the wife should be able to kill the husband, right? So this idea then of on the surface, right? Like no one would actually say, because this is really stressful for me or causes anxiety, or that I should be able to kill someone, right? Like no one in their right mind. But then the reason why it's sort of taken steam is because it's actually the law. Okay? And that part has to change. Yeah, Tron.
For kind of like what Keegan said, not that he was really saying that the teacher would feel better after killing the baby, but arguments similar to that are, like, I know you did, but it's just interesting because culturally, we have so many different movies and stories and books and all this stuff that prove consistently revenge doesn't make you feel better. That's like a consistent theme in literature and film, and it's something that people so often like to forget. Like, fixing this problem aggressively right now, I punched my sister in the face because I'm mad. I might feel kind of good about it then. Very quickly after, I'm going to regret it.
Yeah, exactly.
But I don't think anyone would qualify as revenge. It's more like just getting rid of a reminder.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
some people say this is a problem that you need to kill off, and that's it. It's something that, it's causing you harm, it's been something you must kill it. You need to get rid of it.
Not fair.
And they consider a quick and easy solution. So
Yeah, it's a
it's all a problem. Because we're all about
problem
those
that's not even a
quick
problem.
resolution on demand.
Let's talk about the health of the mother. Anyone know who that is? Yeah, St. John Amola. Let's talk a little bit about her her situation, because I think it's pretty sort of illustrative as to what how best to handle it. So she's pregnant with her fourth child, and she develops this fibroid tumor on her uterus, and she goes to the doctor, and she happens to be a doctor herself. And the tumor is large enough that it's likely to cause an issue. And if they go in and sort of remove it, they could obviously cause complications in the pregnancy. So her doctor comes up with sort of three options. All right. The first is to terminate the pregnancy by a direct abortion and remove the fibroid. The second option is to have a hysterectomy that removes the uterus, which would have obviously killed the child, although not directly. And the third is to remove the fibroid, which was more dangerous because it could she could bleed out, or it could cause the child to have a miscarriage and then continue her pregnancy. All right. I think we all sort of know what she ended up doing. So just to be clear, like, to get her story right, there was no reason, like, initially, that her life was in jeopardy. Okay, so just to kind of play it. So to sort of understand, like, her options, we'll look at the principle of double effect. How many of you guys know about this? All right, so let's kind of just go through it very quickly. All right. So it is morally allowable to perform an act that has at least two effects, provided all four of the following conditions are met. The object to be done must be good in itself. The intent of the agent must be to achieve the good effect and to avoid the evil effect as much as possible. The evil effect must not be directly willed, but only permitted. This is the case even if the evil effect is foreseen. The good effect is proportional to the bad effect, and the good effect must follow directly from the action and not as a result of the harmful effect. All right. Yes, Connor.
So for the fourth one, I've heard it phrased in a way that the good act must proceed at least as proximately from the action as the evil effect. Is that correct, or is that? That's not necessarily like temporal proximity. That's like moral proximity to the action, or at least as directly. Maybe.
I don't know if I've ever heard it said like that. I'm trying to think about why. I mean, what the fourth is really saying, you just basically can't use the bad effect, like, to bring about the good effect. I'd have to think about.
4 is preventing the ends justify the means.
Yes. Go ahead, Keith.
We don't need to go off on this, but just going back to my question at the beginning of last
Oh,
week.
we never saw a tangent we didn't run down. What do you think?
Like hunting rabbits.
This is basically what I was trying to ask. Is this what passive will, like God's passive will, essentially is, or is it?
Yeah, it's very similar to this. It's very similar, like permissive, like permitting. So, in other words, let's just take an ectopic pregnancy, for example. All right. So how is that typically treated? Does anyone know? Say it loud.
You remove people of your tube, which houses the
Okay, that's actually not the.
Yeah, that's the permissible way to treat
That's
it.
not the common way to do it. Actually, is to remove the child off of the.
Yeah, they give you a drug that makes it detached.
Yes. All right. So, but that's the permissible way. All right. So you sort of let the cat out of the bag. So a woman has an ectopic pregnancy, which everyone know what that is. All right. So it's basically that the child attached to the fallopian tube instead of to the uterus. All right. And obviously the child can't survive. All right. So what is? How do you? So if you leave the child there, very often it will sort of just spontaneously miscarriage. Sometimes not. So normally, if it persists for a long time, they'll have to have a surgery of some sort. And the sort of mode of treatment now, sort of common standard of care, is to go in and either go in and remove the child or give medication. Usually it's medical. It's a medicine. So what are our options here, morally speaking? Is the medication that removes the child from the fallopian tube, is that good or not? Why not? All right. So what's the good effect, by the way?
Preserving the mother.
Yeah. So the mother will die if the child continues to. The fallopian tube will rupture, and the child is going to die either way. Okay. So that's sort of understanding that. All right. So the good effect here is saving the life of the mother. Does taking the medication is that the direct cause of saving the mother's life? Yeah, no, it is, right? Like, you're aborting the child to save the mother's life. Maybe I didn't word the question correctly.
But he's in that answer. You said you're aborting the child to save the mother's life. You're not saving the mother's life, and it happens.
Yeah, so that's wrong, right? Like,
That's why
Sorry, I thought you were saying.
no. I'm saying, so this is why we use the term, like, John Paul II uses the term direct abortion, right? Because there can be times where a child will die as a side effect, right? So the death of the child has to be a side effect, not a cause.
The effect of the medicine is the death of the child.
Yes. It's deliberately designed to kill the
So,
child.
yeah.
So the normal, which Elizabeth already talked about, the normal way of treating that is to go in and remove that portion of the fallopian tube, which then has the side effect of killing the child. Okay, so your intention is to save the mother's life. So why you do that, though, is because any other means scars the fallopian tube and then makes it, I forget what, it's like sometimes like 10 times more likely that it happens again, because then there's grooves in the fallopian tube. So you have to remove the diseased part of the fallopian tube so that it doesn't happen again. And so that, because of surgery, they typically don't do it that way. But that's the only moral sort of option in that case. All right. The death of the child is simply a side effect of saving the mother's life. Okay. Yes, Casey.
I
Go.
have questions about. So I was watching a rebuttal of a pro-choice video, and I was unhappy with one of the rebuttals. The pro-choice person made a comment about the fact that there were tons and tons of fertilized eggs that do not attach to the wall of the uterus.
I don't know how you would know that.
It's fair. I don't really either. But and I was just kind of.
What's the
I think there is evidence of some.
Yeah, I'm sure that
the numbers are. Might have
I don't know how you would know that. Are you experimenting on somebody while they're I mean, it seems like one of those claims that could never be substantiated because common sense. They're looking at the screen again. Common sense would tell you that it probably does happen, and so you're almost willing to concede that it happens a lot.
Yeah.
But there's no way of knowing it. I don't think. You mean, is it natural that, in the sense of a miscarriage, or what do you mean?
In that, a miscarriage, a fertilized egg not attaching to the wall of the uterus. That's not what it.
In some cases can be an example of miscarriage. Because it does attach and then it doesn't fully properly attach.
They're basically saying you're upset about abortions, but you don't care about this.
And we're going to come back to this. Actually, this is a good example in a minute.
Related to that, I was going to say similar to a miscarriage. It's as if I just dropped out from a heart attack or something. Now I hope I don't, but no one directly caused that. It was a natural death. That's different than actively
Yes.
ending a life.
Go ahead, Connor.
Just to talk about more in the abstract. So is there with the proportionality of it, is there a point where you would say, okay, I can do really good thing and have bad thing happen, or I can do semi-good thing and not have bad thing happen? Is it just, you just have to make kind of that judgment?
Yeah, I mean, as long as, again, you're sort of working in line with the principal double effect, but that sort of calculation, like you're still willing good, right? And maybe in a certain case you're going to will something that's not as good because you want to avoid it in evil. But as long as the proportionality is the same, but like as long as proportionality is respected in both cases, it's fine.
I think the second principle applies to some of that because you have to try to avoid the evil as much as possible. So if there's any other way to achieve the good, you have to do that.
I guess that's what I'm talking about. Is there might be some accident, some degree of goodness that I could do. Okay, this would be again, it's hard to break it down to calculus level, but there's something that I could avoid the evil entirely, but it would reduce the good that would be done. Do I need to just steer clear as much evil as possible, or is there a point where I can say, okay, this certain amount of evil is justified because of the growth in the good?
I think it's the proportionality is the key, right? So like the great good that is saving a mother's life allows you to permit the death of the child, right? But if there's another way not to have the child die, then you should find it. But either way, as long as the proportionality is respected, then it's fine. What were you going to say?
In regards to St. John's case, that kind of actually leads into the reasoning why number 2 was not permissible, because what you said, like, A, it wasn't a threat to her life at the moment, like with the fibroid tumor or whatever it was in her uterus, and then also because there was a way to preserve the life. Yeah.
So she didn't choose 2. I'll let the cat out of that. She did choose 3, but go ahead, Keegan. We'll come back to it in just a second.
So hypothetically, the drug that you take that would abort the child, it doesn't require surgery. Say that was better for the mother, like less scarring or whatever, like hypothetically. You still can never. So if there's absolutely no chance the child can survive, and doing one thing that was removing part of the fallopian tube, completely knowing that there's not a chance the child can survive, or giving the drug that would kill the child but would be better for the mother, I don't know exactly how I would explain or even understand why it wouldn't be okay to take the drug, because maybe it just comes down to the somebody has to do it, and that's as much I don't know.
You got an answer, Mel?
The first rule of double effect is that it has to be good in and of itself, and so if you're killing someone, that's not good.
Yeah, so based on that rule, obviously, why is that necessary?
Yeah, so always think in terms of, this is where we get wrong, right? So it is harmful to the mother to do evil, right? It's bad for her. Regardless of that, the bodily health effects, we always forget that fact that a mother having to live with the fact that she's killed her child, is a bad thing, right?
I mean, mothers still guilty for miscarriage and they didn't even do it.
Yeah. I mean, it's so, the moral aspect of it is really important, because, this is why you see this effect in women where they have an abortion and they punish themselves and have more abortions. They're like, I can't be a mother. I killed one of my children. It's rampant. None of the mental health sort of aspects are ever addressed, but they do great harm to themselves either way, even if it wasn't. The fact that I mentioned the medication left scarring and it was bad, that's sort of inconsequential. That's just sort of we can't do consequentialistic ethics about it. That was just to sort of show that actually this, even medically speaking, is better. But even if it wasn't better, right? That's why St. Gianna is so important, because even if it wasn't better, she's still better off, because morally speaking, she's done a good, right?
I think
Yes.
you also have to
Go ahead.
be careful to not just look at like the end result and use that. I mean, that's the ends don't justify the means, but like this comes up a lot when people say, well, what's the difference between NFP and contraception? The result's the same, you're still not getting pregnant. But the church consistently teaches that the how is just as important as the what. Because
NFP can also be treated as contraception, which is also bad.
yeah, but I'm just
No.
like there's a gazillion examples that we have trouble talking about, especially in America, because the sort of prevailing mentality is that as long as you get what is the good thing, it doesn't particularly matter how you get there. And I think it's easy to fall into that.
Yeah, and it's it's like how you get the $1 million really matters, right? Like I work hard and I get it, or I rob a bank. Like, the means really matters. Yes, Connor.
Two things. So with regards to what we were just speaking of, we can also say even besides any kind of psychological effects that will happen on a woman, the fact that she did something evil is just bad. Like that's just bad.
Yeah.
So there's no even if she walked away like, oh, I don't feel like it's. There was a like God's creation is let's go like it was a bad thing for her to do. And the second thing is with regards to Keegan's question about how we got like why is the first rule there. The way I've built it up in my head is that if we take kind of like these bad things like the first principle of morality being do good and avoid evil, then okay, and then that's so do good and avoid evil. There comes the first rule. It has to be good. The second part of it comes in the intent must be to do good. And the proportionality, which is like the balance, which makes the principle relevant because you balance the two, the do good and avoid evil. But it's because of the first principle of morality. You cannot do evil.
Yes.
And so that has to be good.
So I have a question more so for so if a woman gets raped, if they go to the hospital, a lot of times they are told to take Plan B, not just to kill any possibility of a pregnancy, but the reasoning they try to give is to kill any of the sperm that's in the body so that way you don't end up with disease. What do you do in that situation?
Yeah, so they can test to see if the woman is ovulating.
Why isn't that their first thing to do then?
Because nobody asks. The first thing is just, spend as little time with the patient as possible, right? Like, I've got to move on. So if they test to see if the woman is ovulating, morally speaking, you can't do anything at that point. If she's not ovulating, then they can intervene and they can do some sort of contraceptive measure because it's not a sexual act, right? She didn't consent to it, and so therefore she can do whatever she has to do in order not to get pregnant. But she can't if she's already in sort of ovulation period. She can't do anything about it then.
And the ovulation period thing is just because we don't. The only way for us to know if there could be a life there is to test that. So we're testing to see if there could be a child there.
Yeah, and there's no test sensitive enough to know
technically we'll do a pregnancy test, but it's not conclusive at that point.
Yeah.
They can't give a conclusion because they have to do that in order to be able to give other medications. So it's just a hard thing to choose, especially if you don't know the information.
Yeah.
Which they don't tell you anything.
All right, so going back to St. Gianna, let's just talk real quickly. One, obviously, is no. Two, Allison talked about if you want to sort of mitigate the evil, if you want to mitigate the evil, then you would choose 3 over 2. Although, morally speaking, she may have been justified to do 2. Just because the death of the child would have, although foreseen, she would not have been willing it directly. But she was a doctor and knew that her life wasn't really in jeopardy. All right, and the reason she ended up dying had to do later on her uterus ruptured, which may or may not have had something to do with the fibroid. You already know that, but nevertheless, she sort of demonstrates here's a hard case. A mother's life is in jeopardy by all the signs, and she took it all the way to the end and ended up dying. Yes, and which is pretty cool because her kids were at her canonization, including the kid who she delivered right before. Yes, Con.
You're saying her life. She had good reason to believe that her life was not imminently in danger. It ended up being, but there's a...
Yeah, I mean, she thought...
Uterine rupture is a risk of every pregnancy.
Yeah. Hers was elevated, and she sort of knew that, but it wasn't like it was imminent. All right, let's talk real quick about contraception, and then if you guys want to hang, because I went way over, we can talk about the death penalty. You guys want?
You should read all three of your articles.
Yes. Or you could do that. All right, so John Paul II calls contraception and abortion fruits of the same tree. Let's talk about why that is. All right. The life which could result from a sexual encounter thus becomes an enemy to be avoided at all costs, and abortion becomes the only possible decisive response to failed contraception. I want to talk about another connection real quick. So, does anyone know how birth control pills actually work?
There's a couple of them.
Ooh, they tell your body you had a miscarriage?
No, not exactly. So there are three ways in which it works, okay? The first is that it inhibits ovulation. The second thing is it thickens the cervical mucus so the sperm can't travel very well. And the third is like a thinning and a shriveling of the uterus. All right. Okay, so here's what the physician desk reference says about birth control pills. Combination oral contraceptives act by suppression of gonadotropins. That's suppressing ovulation. Although the primary mechanism of this action is inhibition of ovulation, other alterations include changes in the cervical mucus, which increase the difficulty of sperm entry into the uterus, and changes in the endometrium, which reduce the likelihood of implantation. What is that last thing I'm talking about?
It's an abortion. Because your child's already born.
Yeah, so it's talking about the child that's already been conceived, trying to implant on the uterus, and you've altered the uterus so that it can't implant. So what is that thing? What do we call that? It's an abortion, right? We call it abortifacient. So I forget, somebody did try to do a study on how many abortions actually occurred because of the birth control pill. It's probably, I think they average that a woman on birth control pills is pregnant about once a year. And then I think, they figure out how many times people actually remain pregnant, and they kind of go from there. But nevertheless, we're talking in the thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, every year of abortions that are carried out that way. So why does this matter, obviously, other than the sort of abortion thing? Is because every time that that you've seen like a human life bill come up, where it says life begins at conception, it hasn't passed. You know why it hasn't passed? Because that goes away. All right? Because if life really does begin at conception, then you can't use birth control pills. All right? And that's problematic. All right? And so until that part, this is why it's fruits of the same tree, right? If you don't get rid of contraception, you're not going to get rid of abortion. All right? Because they're now intimately linked, because a lot of people are actually using abortion as a contraceptive method. All right. So if any of you guys want to leave, you can. We can talk about the death penalty, but I figure I'll end with something controversial. Yeah.
I just wanted to add something that is important when you're reading like church documents on this. The church doesn't usually use the word miscarriage; it'll say spontaneous abortion. And just know that that's the way it says that, and that's what it means, because if you don't know that that's what it's talking about, someone could use that against you in an argument. But spontaneous abortion just means, it's an abortion, the child was aborted, you just didn't will it, it happened spontaneously.
So I want to change my answer. So does birth control work? Not telling
what,
the body has
what page did I write your answer down?
Telling the body it's pregnant, and then when it realizes it's not pregnant, then it thinks it had a miscarriage.
Yeah, so it changes the hormonal levels so that the body thinks it's actually having a period, right? That's why women on birth control pills are constantly not feeling so good, right? Because hormonally they think that their period is starting.
And yet it's prescribed to help the period problem.
Yes.
Yeah.
Again, just literally throwing a pill at a problem.
Plus one carcinogen.
Okay.
So,
Before we get on something controversial, I want to go back to something controversial.
Because abortion wasn't controversial enough.
So you can decide whether to give your direct opinion or just give research to it. I've heard people argue both ways on limbo.
On what?
Limbo.
Okay.
Like what?
So limbo is an application of human reason to the problem of what happens on baptized baby. Like everything about the limbo argument, like makes sense, right? Like the child isn't punished because they haven't sinned; they're not punished, so they go to this place of natural happiness. Because, and the reason why I think it's at least compelling, I can't say whether it's true or not, but at least compelling is because heaven is a reward, right, and hell is a punishment. Like, the child hasn't merited an award or a reward, nor has it merited punishment, right? So, like, hell is probably not an option of the two. Heaven maybe could be, like, but it seems to me that limbo is at least reasonable, even if we don't know.
When they're reunited to their bodies,
yeah. Wait, can you explain limbo real quick?
Yeah, so limbo is this place of eternal natural bliss. So the residents of limbo would spend their time contemplating God as He's naturally known. So think of like they have no supernatural revelation of God. So they don't have the beatific vision. They don't see Him face to face. They just look at all of however God naturally reveals Himself. That's how they know Him. So like through nature, through conscience, through all those things. And so they don't see Him face to face, but they still do know God. So I mean, as far as like an opinion, I don't have a necessary. It's compelling to me, but I also know it's sort of controversial too.
Basically, the question I have, it seems to be, at least in recent times, that a lot of the, like, I think there's one like kind of pro-life rosary thing I read that seemed to very much push towards like the idea of aborted babies just go to heaven. There seems to be a lot of, I feel like you listen to the more traditional side and they say, well, listen, back when limbo was being discussed, people will say it's a theological option. What they really meant is that there were two options, both of which were not the baby going to heaven. Like that was never really discussed.
Yeah. So
now it's more talked about as if it's, well, of course.
Yeah, I mean, I understand the at least the desire for that to be true. I think the only problem with that is I lose a little bit of motivation to save that baby's soul, right? Like if they go to heaven, then why would I worry about it, right? I mean, I would certainly still worry about the life, like the eternal life of the mother. But if the goal is to save souls, I think we have to be really careful assuming that they're in heaven.
And is there a sound theological argument for why they would go to heaven, other than just the moral fact of which we want them?
No, there's no theological argument why. It would just be somehow by the mercy of God, He may test them in some way. There was no way to know that. Like by what we know, we should assume that their salvation is in jeopardy. And that's, I think, the best we could say. Go ahead, Ryan.
So two things kind of related to this. One is that growing up, I had heard that kind of limbo wasn't really discussed a ton, but more similar to a baptism in blood, where like if a child is aborted, like a martyr, similar to like if a martyr is killed before they can officially be baptized. But when they had the intent, the baby was killed before they could be baptized. So kind of similar to baptism in blood. But then kind of a discussion that I heard read related to the whole like, okay, well if they go to limbo, why don't you just like, if they go to heaven, it's easier, especially for Protestants to say, oh, they'll go to heaven, they don't have like purgatory, they'll go to limbo. But yeah, you'd assume like a school bus full of 5-year-olds would probably also, they haven't really had time to really sin, but that doesn't justify blowing up the school bus full of 5-year-olds because they would go right to heaven.
Save souls.
Yeah, I think the issue becomes like, how would they express that desire, right? Like, a desire has to be expressed. How would they don't have capacity to do that. How would they do it? You're thinking.
Because about original sin, and so like if Mary was conceived without sin, then all of us were conceived with sin, and so if our conception we gave the effects of original sin, then
Yeah, so that's the problem, right? So original sin is just a lack of sanctifying grace, right? Which means you can't go to heaven. Right? So they don't have any actual sin that needs to be either like forgiven or punished, but and then they're somehow like if they go to heaven, somehow God has to give them sanctifying grace.
I'm just trusting God, like whatever, like whether it's limbo, whether it's heaven, like.
Well, but I think that's kind of how I am, but I would never assume it's heaven, like because what's the point? Like if they're going to heaven.
You can never assume anyone's going to heaven.
Yeah.
Otherwise, what are you going to do with that time? Like, you need to always pray.
Go ahead, Keith.
So they still have a will, correct?
Yes.
Every time before that, every single human will have the God.
Yeah, but so think about the point that like yes, they have a will, but how a child in the womb exercises his will, because he doesn't have like his body isn't sufficiently organized so that he has knowledge upon objects to set his will. So he has to be able to have the capacity to know something in order to will it. And just as like think of it as like someone who's asleep, right? Like they may have the sort of inherent capacity to do that, to reason, but currently they can't reason. And if you can't reason, you can't will. So somehow God would have to activate that capacity if that was the case. Which is totally, I mean, it could happen.
Yeah, I think this is about to say is like you mentioned before the idea that like everyone is presented the gospel in some natural or supernatural way before they die.
Yeah.
Would that include this? I know it's not like.
I would hope so. Yes, like that would be the thing I would cling to that somehow that they are.
You hope
But
that for people's babies that are aborted and also for just miscarried ones, right?
Yeah.
Otherwise, you'd feel horrible for having a
Yeah.
miscarriage for that too.
If you really want to blow your mind, think about like Mary in the womb. She could actually make acts of her intellect. She wasn't fallen. She could actually choose. She actually knew things.
But she. Why I understand the original sin thing, but she didn't have information to process, did she?
She wouldn't. So she wouldn't need like. She wouldn't need necessary like input in the way that we would need it to know things, right?
Babies in the womb can see light.
Yeah.
So there is information.
Even Lewis talked about like the idea of the unfallen man is passing like in complete control of our bodies, like in our organs and whatnot.
Yeah. Wow. She'd come out reasoning, right? Like, okay, death penalty. I'll try to go through this kind of quickly because we are way over. Good discussion. All right, so why is this even controversial? Everyone sort of know the history of this. So Pope Francis, about maybe a year and a half ago, made a change to the catechism, essentially saying that the death penalty is inadmissible because of an attack on the inviolability and dignity of the person. I'll read the whole paragraph from the catechism because it's important. Recourse of the death penalty on the part of legitimate authority following a fair trial was long considered an appropriate response to the gravity of certain crimes and an acceptable, albeit extreme, means of safeguarding the common good. Today, however, there's an increasing awareness that the dignity of the person is not lost even after the commission of very serious crimes. Consequently, the Church teaches in light of the gospel that the death penalty is inadmissible because of an attack on the inviolability and dignity of the person, and she works with determination for its abolition worldwide. Yes, Connor.
So in saying that,
Are you questioning the Pope, by the way? All I did was read out the catechism. All right, so I just made you into the bad guy instead of me. That's where I was going.
I was trying to up the ante, but anyway. So I'm not sure who wrote this. The person who wrote this, are they trying to say that?
So the quoted part is Pope Francis. The death penalty is inadmissible.
So starting at the 2 days, after the Congress today, are they trying to say that yesterday the church doctors who thought it was okay to do the death penalty did not have awareness of the dignity that a human person is not lost after the commission of very serious crimes? Because I think
that would be the claim.
Or that the church was in the dark of the gospel.
That too, right? So some of this too, like the reason why this is a good example, right, is the church is plagued right now, which is why I'm here, by ambiguity, right? Like does not teach clearly what needs to be taught, right? It's just the effect of sort of years of doing it that way. There's not enough clarity in the church's teaching. So this can mean everything and anything because it's stated ambiguously. Ambiguously. Why can't I say that word?
Ambiguously.
Yeah, I'm seeing the word, but then I can't say it. What were you going to say, Keith?
Is this considered infallible?
Okay, so let's talk about that first. All right. The catechism in and of itself is not an authoritative document. Okay? You know why? Because he changed the catechism. What can't change? Authoritative teaching, right? So what the catechism is a summary of the faith. And there's certainly official catechisms. But all of the authority of the catechism sits and rests in the footnotes. Right? This is why footnotes are really important. And then so it's on the level of whatever the footnote is taught at. Okay? Is this an infallible teaching? No. And we're going to talk about why. Okay?
And quick question too.
I don't like when you smile and tell me quick questions because I feel like you're setting up a trap for me.
In relation to God's existence, it's a quick question.
So like
So the seventh day. What was that like?
I could have this wrong, but from what I remember of Exodus, God commands that if somebody has a certain offense, they should be killed.
Okay, yeah, that's Genesis, but yes.
Okay, that is a command of God, and so
He didn't have the living
Yeah. So wait.
death penalty.
Yeah, just stop there because that's actually we're going to talk about that example.
I want to bring up. I started reading things and just found some points.
Just things
about this. So, a few questions I want to bring up to make sure we actually look at this. Which is the first question would be, what is the strongest level of doctrine that the death penalty has ever been taught as? Because that's really important, because that impacts whether or not the teaching can change. Mm-hmm. And then the next question would be, if you're going to bring up things like that, you also have to reconcile the fact that the Levitical law did change in certain core ways. You have to reconcile it with that. And then also the fact that the church does actually teach that God taught certain laws that we no longer allow because they were taught to a culture, not to everyone. And so, whatever we come up with has to fit within those things.
Yes.
I think that gives me at least enough of a framework to feel not so alarmed about this, because I don't think I've ever heard answers to those three questions at the same time as someone saying the Pope's teaching heresy. Because heresy is actually very, very difficult.
Yeah, so what I'm not saying for sure is that the Pope is teaching heresy. So I'm not saying that.
But I just want to make sure we're not trying to get...
But I think I am going to answer your other three questions by the time we're done. All right, so let's just at least ask if this is an open question, at least according to Cardinal Ratzinger, a.k.a. Pope Benedict. Catholic would be at odds with the Holy Father on the application of capital punishment. He would not for that reason be considered unworthy to prevent himself to receive Holy Communion. While the Church exhorts civil authorities to exercise discretion and mercy and impossible in imposing punishments on criminals, it may still be permissible to have recourse to capital punishment. There may be a legitimate diversity of opinion, even among Catholics, about applying the death penalty. All right, so what is he saying?
He's saying there's a door open, it's questionable.
Yeah, so that the death penalty can be applied is not an open question. I think this is what he's saying. What I'm saying is how it is applied and when it is applied is. Okay? And we'll talk about why. Okay, so you guys understand levels of teaching that if something is taught across time by numerous popes, say from the beginning to now, right? That's considered an infallible teaching. That's called the ordinary magisterium of the Church. So if something is taught from the beginning all the way through, that's to be believed as if it's infallible. Okay, so the Church doesn't just teach infallibly by the Pope teaching as cathedra. They can also teach by what's called the ordinary magisterium. Okay, and so if you go back throughout time, you'll find Pope after Pope after Pope saying that the death penalty is permissible. You'll find the Council of Trent saying that it's permissible. And they all sort of disagree as to how prudentially that's supposed to be done. But nevertheless, if you look at sort of the ordinary magisterium throughout the history of the Church, it's there. Yes?
But that wouldn't necessarily apply to anything, because let's say from the very beginning of time it was taught that the priest ought to wear a chasuble when he's celebrating Mass. That doesn't mean that tomorrow they couldn't, correct me if I'm wrong, that doesn't mean tomorrow that they couldn't say, actually we're going to change what vestments a priest wears.
No. So it applies to what we believe is part of divine revelation. right? So a chasuble is not part of divine revelation. And that sort of goes to John Claude's question about, is this in divine revelation? Did you have a question?
I'm just kind of always been confused about the death penalty because, judging whether or not someone deserves to die, I think that doesn't go to us.
I agree.
So, I don't know. I just struggle with this idea that it was ever a thing. But,
okay, we can talk about that. So, what was the is it a second or third class this semester? It might have been the first. What was the important part of when we remember we had this long discussion on authority? Where do we believe as Catholics? Where do we believe civil authority comes from? God. So when Jesus goes to Pilate, he says, "You would have no authority over me except unless it was given to you from above." Right. So this is a difference between Catholics and Protestants, right? Like Protestants will say authority comes from below. They sort of have this democratic principle on all things, right? This is why I emphasize this several times. So to sort of answer your question, we as Catholics would believe that the state has the authority to do that, right? Because God gave it to them.
And why doesn't the state say that they can kill anything that they want?
Well, yeah. So it has to be just. It has to be all those things, and that's why they say, okay, in certain situations where it can't be done justly, don't do it.
My only issue is the amount of people who have died on death row who are innocent.
Which is the point about application.
Right? Yeah, application matters. Don't get stuck in the application thing. What we're trying to do is challenge the fact that it's never admissible. That's what I want to get at first, and then we can talk about when you
I don't think it should exist if it has the potential of harming innocence.
And that is true, but we're saying you don't argue principles from applications. You start with principles and then get to applications.
Yeah. So we're sort of we could certainly say, okay, you have to have X, Y, Z to prove that this person did it beyond any doubt. Okay. Or, you could have innocent, you can set it up so that what I want to do is sort of get at, because when
we're assuming that everything is pure in the idea.
Yeah, because that's always what you do on a level of principle, right? Okay. Yeah, so you start with principle and then you say, okay, how do we apply this in the fallen world? Yes, Keaton.
Back to the ordinary magistrate real quick, if I'm saying that right. Does that have to be unanimous, or does that just have to be almost unanimous?
You would see it being unanimous. In the sense, you'll see it popes, councils that are legitimate councils, and you'll see it in the fathers of the church.
So, just for instance, if Pope Francis disagreed, does that end the authority from the ordinary magistrate?
No. So it could be against. So at this point, 2,000 years into it, if it's been taught for 2,000 years, it's part of the ordinary magistrate.
Yeah, that's also the point about your point about heresy is hard to point out. Absolutely, which is why vagueness is not heresy. Right.
All right, let's try to move just a little bit. I just want to make sure we don't run out of time. All right, so part of the problem is that the paragraph right before this paragraph contradicts what 2267 says. The efforts of the state to curb the spread of behavior harmful to people's rights and the basic rules of civil society correspond to the requirement of safeguarding the common good. Legitimate public authority has the right and duty to inflict punishment proportionate to the gravity of the offense. Punishment has the primary aim of redressing the disorder introduced by the offense. When it is willingly accepted by the guilty party, it assumes the value of expiation. Punishment then, in addition to defending public order and protecting people's safety, has a medicinal purpose. As far as possible, it must contribute to the correction of the guilty party. All right, so what's the purpose of punishment? So the first is reestablishment of justice. All right, so when a crime is committed, sort of the order of justice has to be restored. The other two points in here are sort of secondary. The first, it must be ordered to the correction of the offender himself so that it's proportionate. It's medicinal. And then it also has to be proportionate to the crime committed. And then it must have a social purpose, okay, because it's ordered to the common good. All right, is that all clear? Okay. All right. So what is it? What is the death penalty then really a question about? Justice. Yeah, it was about justice, but is it about proportionality, right? Okay? That's really what we're getting at, right? Does anyone have the authority to take another person's life? All right. Yes, Con.
Couldn't we also ask, is it actually contributing to the common good?
Yeah, you could certainly ask that. Although certainly it's protective of the common good.
In a determined sense, or like you think like people won't commit a crime.
Well, I mean, it can also like you're protecting other prisoners from violent offenders. Like there's a lot of like you can make an argument from that, right?
That's a stretch. But you could say the common good in the sense that you're standardizing proportional justice or holding up that.
Well, proportionality I think is where the argument lies, but I think also like you are protecting prisoners from other violent, like somebody who gets say life in prison. Like I spend time in central prison, I don't know what those guys are like. Like there is a certain segment of the population that if they get an opportunity, they will kill somebody. Like they think nothing of it, right? And so those people in there, those guys that aren't that way, have a right to life and they have a right to be protected. They are part of society. The common good has to flow back over them, right? Too. So I mean, you can certainly make an argument that even if you put someone in prison, that they're still a threat to somebody, right? Who has rights? Yes, Connor.
When you say you spent time in central prison, you meant prison ministry, right?
No, yes. Yes. And I mean, I met guys who were on death row, so it's like, I sort of get this. Yes, Connor, you knew that, by the way. You were trying to say
well, I wanted to make sure everyone else knew.
I think everyone took it as like, okay.
I don't know, man.
Yeah.
It was on the recording. It was going to.
All right. Anyway, all right. So the question is about proportionality, then. Okay. Ultimately, all right. Are there some crimes that are so bad that they deserve death? Okay. That's ultimately the question. All right. So let's take an example. Let's say somebody kills 25 people. Right? A serial killer. All right. Does he deserve death? Okay, so let's back up. So what would be a proportional? Go ahead.
Okay, a serial killer, like, in what terms are they a serial killer? Because, like, that's, like...
Let's just say they in cold blood, they just walk up to people.
But like, you can do that in cold blood and still have a mental illness. Is it because...
Yeah, don't even assume, like, don't even get to, like...
Because, like, just, like, following the rules of a serial killer, there's something going on, like, upstairs. Like, not...
Yeah, remember when we're sort of still in principle mode, right? Like, not in... Like, I agree, like, someone who has a mental illness, like, totally, like, they're not necessarily responsible for what they do. All that, I get that.
Okay.
But stay on the sort of the level of principle, right? So, 25 people, perfectly rational person, knows what they're doing, plan it out. Because, I mean, you got to be a little sick in the head probably to kill 25 people anyway, right? So, do they deserve death?
I don't think so, but I don't really know what you mean by deserve.
Well, is that a just punishment?
Can we determine that, though?
I think we forget. I think people who think it's not just forget the next to life. The fact of the matter is, we are not we're not damning them to hell. Like that's not our role. But we do have a role in temporal, punishment.
Yes.
So, like, we think, oh wow, we're doing the worst thing possible to them because we're taking away their life. But there is life.
Yeah, which we're going to get to in just a second, right? Go ahead, Keith.
So, to phrase it a different way, they have essentially lost the right to life due to their high possibility of taking another's life. Like, I'm confused with the deserving thing.
Yeah, so would it be just to take the life of, just use just, don't even worry about deserving?
I think it could.
So there is a threshold, right? So you agree that, say, somebody who killed one person gets life in prison, somebody who killed 25 people also gets life in prison. What are we missing there? Like, is that person supposed to get the same punishment as this person?
No, that wouldn't be proportionate.
Yeah, so there's definitely a proportionality problem, right?
Well, so my question then would be, so say someone kills 25 people and someone kills 3,000.
Yeah, right. And you kill both of them, they get the same punishment. It's still not proportional. Like,
well, but
God to then take
but so that's the question of whether, like, is the capital punishment like the end? Like, where does it stop? Is life in prison enough to stop the sort of the proportionality, or must we go another step and say that's where the question is, right?
Like, are you saying, like, what is our maximum punishment we can?
Yes.
We can do more than life in prison. We can't really do more than
Yeah.
torture them.
Go ahead. What is your name?
MJ.
Okay, MJ. Go ahead.
So, Yeah, that is my name. So.
Is she giving me false names?
No.
It's the undercover thing? Oh, we're back at the undercover thing. Yeah. Go
It's a
ahead.
nickname based
Okay.
on her initials. Yeah.
It's appropriate.
Thank you, Ryan. Because apparently I don't have the ability to prove myself. So, like, I guess first of all, like, I don't even know what I was going to ask now. Thanks, guys. But, like, I don't know. The only thing I struggle with the idea is, like, sometimes for people to repent, it takes time. And sometimes that means taking the rest of their life sitting in a jail cell looking at a wall and thinking over it. Like,
Okay.
are we not taking
Can
the
we
ability to repent?
can we hold the repent question till the end? Is
Okay.
that we're going to talk about that?
Okay.
Yes, go on.
So I noticed on the Keegan story, I want to draw attention to it. So he said that, okay, somebody kills 25, like, okay, so to make sure they don't kill another. Or that's sound like he said something.
He
like,
was saying the next life is in heaven or hell.
Yeah.
Not
No,
the next life they might kill.
So, to explain, I think, none of us deserve life. So I didn't understand how he could say.
Yeah, deserve probably wasn't a good word to use.
And so I was trying to rephrase that, and I was talking about the next person that they would kill. Is that why they lose their right to life? Because I think that's the only thing that we could say they deserve to have that taken away. Maybe.
And that's what I wanted, because I at least my understanding of what you're saying is that it's not that this person kills 25 people and we are killing them so that they don't kill the 26. Is that they kill 25 people.
Yes.
And
So it can't be a deterrent to that like you can't use the death penalty as a deterrent. It may have that effect, but again, that's using something like toying with someone's life to get the good effect of not having other people commit the crime.
To acknowledge the human dignity of the 25 people they killed, like, it requires a just punishment. Just, say someone kills 25 people and you give them $1,000 fine. That seems like you are not acknowledging human dignity. I recommend you.
Okay. So this becomes now, what is a human life worth? Okay. So like dignity is a two-edged sword. You can't simply just say, okay, the capital punishment takes away the person's dignity. But if human beings have this great dignity, then they've also taken away the dignity of another person. All right. So dignity goes both ways. Yes.
So this plays communicate. Can you define dignity?
Dignity is simply just the inherent value in a thing based upon what it is. And in the human case, like humans are treated a certain way because they
Why
are.
doesn't Mary have more dignity than me? Or is that the thing where they start with the equal dignity, then you can increase and decrease your dignity?
Yes, it goes both ways, right? All right, so you can't, on the one hand, say the human life is so valuable that you can't kill it, or you can't kill the person, and then on the other hand, say that human life is so valuable that when someone takes that life, that they're not responsible with their own life for it. Okay, so the human dignity argument is sort of a wash. All right, and the reason why it's a wash is because God in Genesis tells Noah that anyone who sheds the blood of a human being by a human being shall that one's blood be shed. For in the image of God have human beings been made. So what is being said here is because of the dignity of human beings, then anyone who sheds the blood of a human being should also have their blood shed by human beings. All right? And so why doesn't this apply to like the Levitical law? Does anyone know? Because where is it? Way prior to, right? Way prior to Leviticus. All right? So, here's the problem. All right? If you say it's inadmissible, meaning wrong, then God has commanded something that is wrong. Yes?
Divorce.
God didn't command it, He allowed it. God is commanding here. That's very different.
So when Moses, I don't know the exact history of the bill of divorce being introduced. So did Moses say you can give a bill of divorce? In which case, did God tell him to say you can give a bill of divorce, or did he just make that decision by himself and God didn't stop him?
I have no idea. We only hear about that interior part of it from Jesus, right, where He just says, God, Moses granted the bill of divorce because God allowed because of the hardness of your hearts.
So basically, at least from that way, it's okay. Some group of people said, "Hey, why can't we just do this bill of divorce thing?" And Moses and/or in one of the same God said,
Yeah, so the sort of the understanding is that people were taking the till death do you part literally, and were killing their wives, and so to eliminate that evil, he permitted a lesser evil.
Did he not kill the husbands?
No, so
the husbands were killing
the wives.
That's what I'm saying. Did he not punish the husbands by killing them?
Well, still, you'd want to. You still don't. Yeah, like she's already dead at that point. Right? Like, yeah. Well, they're the worst neighbors ever. Like that was easy. All right, so the human dignity thing sort of is a two-edged sword, and if you go strictly to Revelation, we find that because human beings are so great, there is a proportional punishment based upon what God is saying of a life for a life.
Does who sheds human blood, or the blood of human? Does that imply death, or like Johnny pushes me down on the playground, can I push him back as he's great?
Yeah, that has always been assumed to apply to death in the context.
Okay.
All right, so Revelation says that at a certain point, yes, this is okay. All right. Now, where that line is really important. All right. So let's just deal with real quick with the repentance question, because we said it had to have a medicinal effect. All right. So to be a just punishment has to have a medicinal effect. And some people will say, well, okay, it takes a long time. Somebody did say this actually. It will take a long time for the person to repent. All right. Now, that again can go both ways, right? Because if you're going to die in the morning, repentance becomes gets sped up a little bit, right? So you can't argue one way or the other about that, right? Like, in fact, St. Thomas said that a person was more likely to repent if they were once they were given the death penalty.
It's like the myth of deathbed conversions,
So the Vatican State used to perform the death penalty, okay? And what they would do, and then this becomes now another question of prudence, right? They would prepare the person for death. They would have a priest, they'd have confession, they'd have all those things, right? Because what? We believe that, like, death is not the worst thing that can happen to you, okay? That offering a death to God is what we're supposed to do, right? And if that is because of a punishment for a sin, then so be it. But, okay, so you'd say, well, what about the person that didn't repent, right? Where is that person going? Hell, right? And where are they if they continue to not repent, where are they going?
Hell.
Deeper into hell, right? So you've actually saved them either way, right? So you've saved them from going deeper into hell. Hell is the hierarchy just like heaven, right? And so the argument about repentance goes the other way, I think. I think it actually forces repentance, and it either way is medicinal to the person. Yes, Keith?
Is this saying that in order for punishment to be just, it has to be medicinal?
It has to be aimed at that. I mean, whether the person takes it as medicine or not is a different question, right? But yeah, so punishment should be penitential in nature. Yes, Connor?
So given the conclusion that we just reached, that not only is the death penalty listed, but it is being commanded by God, at least in certain circumstances, and it is medicinal, oriented towards the salvation of souls. What do we make of the fact that the Holy Father has now said it is not permissible and wrong?
Yeah.
He didn't say it was intrinsically wrong.
Yeah, so that's the thing. So it's ambiguous enough that anyone can sit and say, no, it's saying what I'm saying. So what I wanted to do, the reason why I brought this up was for us to talk about what the church's understanding of the death penalty is. How often it is applied, and how justly, if there's a problem with justice, it shouldn't be applied. But what I want to make sure is that the church says that it should always be an option. All right? It should be on the table. And how we apply, the church isn't going to say, don't apply, do apply here, because that's under the purview of the state.
It's
right?
kind of like Paul Ryan.
Yeah. So, and in fact, the church loses some of her moral authority when she does that, right? So, even bringing this up in the catechism kind of hurts the church a little bit because it spreads it too much, right? Like, there are certain circumstances where, the death penalty is the only way, right? Even if, from the common good argument, what if you can't keep someone in prison? What about El Chapo, right? What do you do? So, to take it off the table completely actually leads to like further injustice, right? And this is why now Pope Francis is moving towards getting rid of life imprisonment because he's already taken proportionality out, and so he would say, okay, well, life in prison is cruel and unjust, right? And so once you have no proportionality, which is really dangerous because that's when injustices occur a lot, right? Where people just get arbitrary punishments. Go ahead, Connor.
Why does anti-death penalty and I think pro-immigration and something else often get roped under the umbrella of pro-life?
Yeah, so it's what we talked about last week about that sort of humanitarian ethics, confusing humanitarianism with the gospel, right? We are about saving souls, right? And there are plenty of people. There was a guy hanging next to Jesus whose soul was saved, right? Who was executed, right? There are plenty of people who have been saved because they were executed, right? And if we want to save souls, then we have to be first and foremost concerned with like saving their soul, not prolonging their life. Now, those two things often and very often go together, right? But death is not the worst thing that can happen to you, right? And when we confuse that, that's when things get like this. Is also the obsession with the environment too. I think it's this humanitarian approach to the gospel versus like looking long term for the supernatural aspects, right? Of really thinking about, well, what is the most likely thing to take this criminal and actually turn him back to God? Might the death penalty actually be used for that? Go ahead, MJ.
Is it better to kill someone before they kill themselves then? Because I'm sure you know from working in prisons, it's not uncommon.
Oh yeah.
It's common to see that they'll try to kill themselves. And
yeah, so you couldn't like.
Is it better for that to occur? That's a genuine question. I'm not trying
to.
Yeah,
if in the like grand scheme of things, yes, but you wouldn't plan like that. You wouldn't go, this guy's likely to kill himself, so let's hang him in the morning. Okay. Right? Because that's doing like if it's not time, it's not just. He hasn't like all the opportunities to defend himself. Like that's unjust.
They need to still put him through a fair trial. They need to still offer him the petition.
Yeah.
Like you can't just like skip going to confession because he's going to try to hang himself.
Yeah, yeah. And if like to your point, if it's not possible to have a just trial and it's not possible to justly apply it, then it shouldn't be applied.
What if they're a person who will continue to try, what if it's not proportional necessarily to their crime? Like they're just in prison for like possession of marijuana.
Oh, no, the proportionality has to be part of it.
Right? It has to be.
Yeah.
So even if you cannot do that just to prevent them.
Yeah, so it have to be something really grievous. Really grievous.
That's just like, that's something that was posed to me by a person before, and I was like, I don't know how to answer.
Yeah, so the proportionality, and that's why, like, I think it still has to be on the table because that protects proportionality across the board.
Okay.
Right? Does this make sense?
What evidence do you have that the Pope is moving to say that life imprisonment is not?
Yeah, he's talked about it in speeches.
He has? Okay.
Yeah. I feel comfortable being taped saying that because he said it himself. I'm not saying anything that he hasn't said a couple of times.
Rob and him met up one day. And
yeah, we just talked.
He saw the photo that Casey made and he was like,
yeah. Casey, I don't know what's going to happen next week, buddy. I really don't. Oh, wait. You won't be here next week in a couple weeks. I'm not really sure. All right, who wants to pray? And any questions? Sorry, we went really long.
Is this our most controversial life that we talked about?
No. It will never be predestination.
Yeah. That's the topic we never talk about.
How is predestination worse than this?
Dude, it got so like confusing and
at least half the class left thinking there was no chance they would go to heaven.
When was
this? This actually may have been in RCA. It may not have been.
It was?
Yeah.
Well, it was the worst.
I think somebody brought it up and he shouldn't have. We won't say who that was.
I have brought that up.
I don't know. I think you did. I'm sure you did. I'm blaming you anyway.
Rob, was that worse than the transubstantiation versus consubstantiation?
Yeah, because I had an answer for that one. The predestination one got me so spun. Like, I was literally dizzy, and I'm like...
Reading some of Thomas, I'm like, oh yeah,